Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's session. My name is Nikki Campbell. I am the Education Coordinator here at the BCACC, and I want to thank you for joining us for this Mind Matters or Matters of the Mind presentation, where our members bring forward important topics to the public just to help people get a solid understanding of how they can manage different aspects of their lives. And so tonight we have Mary Klovance, who you might see in the corner of my screen. Hello, Mary.
Hey.
And in a moment, I'll introduce you to Mary, really, but I want to take 1 second to acknowledge the lands that I'm coming from tonight. So I and BCACC acknowledge the Lekwungen people, also known as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, for the privilege of conducting these kinds of educational sessions on these lands. And so Mary has been working as both a middle school and high school counselor since 2012, and then recently opened a private practice in 2020. Previously, she worked as the crisis intervention counselor for the Youth Empowerment Society, where she spent more than 6 years working with youth at risk. Mary has ADHD and now specializes in supporting parents of youth with challenging behaviors. And so I think with that, I am going to turn it all over to you, Mary, and really we'll manage questions mainly towards the end. Maybe we might bring a burning question forward if it's really on the spot. But other than that, Mary, I'll let you sort of govern how it goes.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much. So you did my little intro there. So at the Neurodiversity Center, we do support all humans, all types of humans. We don't just specialize in families and youth, and we do offer like workshops and stuff like that. So I'm really excited to be here tonight to talk to you about all the things. As Nikki said, I too have ADHD. So you might notice me shifting a little bit or talking too fast. So if you're finding it's going a bit fast, feel free to type in. Nikki's going to keep track for me of kind of what's going on in the Q&A. And then if I'm going too fast, we'll slow it down. So that's the stuff. Let's get started. So I wanted to start off by just addressing what neurodiversity affirming is. Now, what I have come to discover and learn is that being neurodiversity affirming is consistently a conversation because there's different things being told. I work in the school system. In the school system, they say do this. In private practice, I hear that say this, right? And it's a constant discussion that we need to have. And actually, me and Nikki were just talking about that before. So the concept of neurodiversity affirming is an acceptance-based approach. It's recognizing that all humans are individuals with strengths and challenges, no matter what their neurotype is. It is knowing that the difference in how we think, feel, and behave is what makes each person unique. It is not asking a person to change who they are or how they think, act, or feel, also called masking, in order to fit certain criteria for acceptance. And sometimes I find in my counseling practice, it almost seems like there's a here, fix my kid situation that happens with some families because it's like, this is hard, right? It is hard to parent any child, any amount of children. And so what we try to say is here, we're not here to fix a person. We're here to, focus on the environment, what is going on. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So those of you all signed up for the kind of self-regulation, social emotional education bit, we're going to talk about all of those things and really look at it through a neurodiversity affirming lens. We are not here to change your children. We're here to make life easier for them. Okay, that's our goal. So I wanted to start off with the superpowers of ADHD. Okay, more full disclosure, I learned as an adult, I also have anxiety, but I always thought, no, I'm not anxious because I'm in control of everything until I had a child and then I wasn't in control anymore. And so my anxiety went up, but I almost felt like my ADHD and my anxiety created this perfect match so that my anxiety kept my ADHD in check. But there's so many things about ADHD that are amazing and wonderful. And I want to start off with that. So living fully in the moment. Okay, just being present, being like, yes, right now is what is the most important thing, really focusing on that. The energy that can come with ADHD, being observant, right? Like I will notice the smallest changes at school. I might not even know that kid's name, but man, I know he got a haircut, and I'll be like, nice new haircut. And they're like, what? How? But I notice these things, right? Easily tunes out annoying stimulus or people, right? So tuning out, which of course from the parent perspective can be kind of annoying when you're trying to tell your child something important, but when they're trying to do something important to them, they can focus on what's in front of them. Passionate about ideas and interests, creative thinkers, excited to share ideas with others. You know, I got in trouble for talking too much. I'm just excited to share my ideas, okay? I got a lot that I'm thinking about, and I want to share them. Incredible capacity for play, being very playful. A unique view of the world. We see things differently. We're so observant, and we can, you know, that's what that diverse part is. You know, we're looking at things from a different angle, in a different way. We're asking questions that maybe you never thought of before. Single-mindedness of purpose, meaning if we're really into something, we might know all the things, right? We're really focused on that. And of course, there's fancy words like hyper-focus and whatnot. What else we got? Passionate, unique sense of humor. We're persistent. If we're really into something, and again, from a parenting perspective, when they're being persistent about something we've said no to can be annoying, but way to go. That's going to serve them as adults to be persistent. They're in touch with their emotions, right? We're very emotional. Can easily move on after disagreements for some youth, right? Some of you have experienced this, that you get in a big argument, big fight, big whatever, disagreement with your kiddo. And 10 minutes later, they're like, yeah, what's for dinner, Dad? And you're like, dude, you just said all these terrible things to me. And they're like, what do you mean? That was like, I'm over that. So what's great about being so emotional is we can actually go through this whole emotional circle and be done with it and move on. Whereas neurotypical people are still holding on to the offense that just happened, right? We have strong desires. We really like those things. We're really into those things. Now that desire might not last a long time, but again, living in the moment, we're really into it for however long we can be. And there's so many more superpowers. These are just some of them. So today's topics. Number one, we're going to talk about meeting them where they're at, meaning your kiddos. Number two, social emotional skills. Number three, self-esteem and self-efficacy. And number four, self and co-regulation. Meet them where they are at. Acceptance is everything. Okay? This is the first step. Anytime I work with a new family, new parent, parents, caregivers, whomever, we have to talk about, we need to accept your child for who they are. First step. We need to stop wishing they were this, wondering why they can't do this, being frustrated that they're not doing this, and just go, okay, where are they at right now? So have you ever found yourself saying, why can't they just insert? Or other kids their age don't da 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 da, or other kids their age do blah 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 blah. Insert name of other child was never like this, right? Often when you have a neurotypical child and a neurodiverse child, we see that. Why do they always, right? So these are hints, okay? These are tips. Why do they always? Why can't they just? That's where your kid is at. So let's stop getting frustrated and angry about why they're not doing the things and go, this is what they can do. I wonder what is stopping them from being able to. What's going on here? Is there something we can work on? Is this a brain development stage thing going on? Right? Staying curious. So instead of the frustration, I want to implore you to get curious, okay? Instead of why can't they just, which sounds like a question, but it's kind of not, into, what is going on here? What is the difficulty? What is holding them back? So instead of fighting it, step one is to accept it. Your child is an individual with unique talents and challenges. They are not their sibling, okay? They are not your friend's child. They are not their best friend at school. They are unique, okay? So we need to accept who they are and go, all right, this is what we need to work on to make their life easier, which in turn makes our lives easier. Next step is expect it, okay? Learn the antecedents to the challenges. So learn the things that happened before to the challenges your child faces, and expect the challenges to occur when your child is triggered. So going back to this one of why do they always? They always do it. So why is that even a question? Let's expect it. Okay. So now that you're expecting it, how can you respond to it? So that's where we move to the third phase, is prepare for it. Have a plan for what you're going to do in order to support your child when they are triggered. You know what their triggers are, or do you? Because something you should be exploring, right? Expect it, prepare for it. Because when you prepare for it, then you can respond. Because what happens if we're not expecting it, we start to react, and they're reacting. And how are we expecting our child to regulate when we're not regulated, because we're just reacting instead of responding? So the difference from reacting and responding. Reacting is an automatic thing. I'm not really thinking about it. I'm just doing what kind of feels good in the moment, whether it's yelling or taking a break, but I'm not really thinking about what I'm doing. Responding is a thought out response. I want to do this because I want this to happen. Really, really thinking kind of future forward. So I'm okay with stopping here just to see if there is any questions that popped up that would make sense to talk about right now. Are we good to go?
Well, I might just ask one question that came up.
Yes.
And if we're going to get to this later, that's fine. Do you have any guidance on how to talk to your child pre-pediatrician visit to prepare them for that first appointment? My son is 13.
Okay. So I would say in that specific question is pretty specific and not totally what we're talking about in this exact second, but I can definitely, I'll talk about that at the end, because I feel like that's like a good longer one.
That's perfect.
Anything else coming up kind of about the accept it, expect it, prepare for it?
I think we're good right now. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. Social emotional skills. We're doing it. So this beautiful thing I got from our district and it's all over the internet, but social and emotional learning. We're only going to talk about some of this today, but what I want to do is get you guys thinking about what that means, right? Because we hear about social and emotional learning. If your kids are school age, you might have gotten emails from the district or teachers saying, we're going to focus on that in class. This is what it means. Oh, sorry. Okay, sneeze, not happening. All right, self-management. That's what we're kind of talking about today. Managing emotions and behaviors to achieve one's goals. But here's the thing, and I keep hinting at it, I'm going to do it the whole presentation, is self-management, managing your emotions. Children's brains are not developed yet. So there are a part of every child's brain that is not developed, and that's that emotional management. And when you have a child with ADHD, that part of the brain is not as developed as it is for that age. So going back to that, why, other kids can do this and they can't. Yeah, because that part of their brain hasn't developed yet, right? And so we need to have some empathy for that. And instead of pushing and pushing, going, oh, okay. The other part is we want our children to feel like they can share their emotions. We don't want them to feel like managing their emotions means not having any, right? We don't want to tell them the way they're doing it is wrong, because that's what feels good for them, right? Just like when we have to feel like we have to yell sometimes, it feels good in the moment, but that's not us managing our emotions, right? We all do it. Self-awareness, recognizing one's emotions and values as well as one's strengths and challenges. Okay, so self-awareness, this, we're learning about that all through, even in our 20s. Responsible decision-making, making ethical, constructive choices about personal and social behavior. So again, this is an area of challenge for those with ADHD. Relationship skills, forming positive relationships, working in teams, dealing effectively with conflict, and then social awareness, showing understanding and empathy for others. So every human struggles with these things, okay, at different parts. All children struggle with these things because it takes time and experience and brain development to do that. But again, these can all especially be challenges for your children who have ADHD. And I was going to say this earlier, but I forgot, so I'm saying it now. Another thing to consider when I was talking about neurodiversity affirming is the language we use. So it is a preference for a lot of people to actually say ADHD children or ADHD youth instead of children with. And the reason for that is when you put the neurodiversity in front of the name, it's basically saying, look, my child will always have this. It's not something that can be changed about them. Whereas the assumption is if it says a child with whatever the thing is, that means it can be changed, that it's not a integral part of who they are. So that's also something to remember. So you might notice the name of this workshop is Parenting Youth with ADHD. And some people might say that it's not neurodiversity affirming. So this goes back to what I was saying before about language and watching how we're saying things. I think that's important to consider as we go through. So you might notice I switch it up throughout the presentation because it's something that I'm still kind of wrapping my head around and talking to others to learn more about. All right, self-esteem and self-efficacy. Sorry, my kid's sick and now I think I'm getting her sick. Sorry for the sniffles. Okay, what's the difference? Okay, that's where we're going to start with some definitions here. Self-esteem, how a person feels about themselves. Self-efficacy, how much a person believes in their ability to do things. So they're actually very different. And you can have high self-esteem and low self-efficacy, or high self-efficacy and low self-esteem, okay? They are not mutually exclusive. You know, they can all be whatever. It's all over the place. So one thing about this is that if your child has low both, okay, let's say both self-esteem and self-efficacy is low, you can choose one or the other to try to work on with them first. And by increasing that one, it may also increase the other, okay? So it is possible to increase one to increase the other. In my experience, my self-esteem when I was younger was very low, but I soon realized things were easier for me because of my fast processing speed, thanks to ADHD, that I was like, wow, I can actually do stuff. Like I can figure things out where other people are still trying to figure it out, and I can like get things. So my self-efficacy went up, and as that went up and as I got older, my self-esteem went up because I was like, you know, that's actually a pretty cool thing that I could do. Okay, now I'm feeling better, right? So building self-esteem, let's say you're like, no, I want to focus on building self-esteem with my kid. A, focus inwards, okay? So you're placing importance on values and beliefs. An example is, you're such a kind person, okay? So you're giving them feedback about the type of person they are that's positive, focusing on inwards. You're not going, wow, you're so pretty, right? Because that can change, right? You're not focusing on things that can change. I mean, I guess technically, if you're kind, you can also not be kind all the time, but we're trying to think of things that they're going to go, you know, their whole lives going, yeah, I'm a kind person. So focusing inward. B, which goes back to A a little bit, is praise. You're focusing on effort and values. So an example is, that was so kind of you to do that thing, right? So there's a big thing about praise. Well, someone's raised their hand. Awesome. So we'll get, I'm happy to answer that question if they've raised a hand. Is there a question in the chat? Oh, I can't hear you.
Sorry.
Nikki.
Hi. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I have a child who's recently diagnosed as autistic and ADHD, and therefore absolutely hates getting praise. Takes it he actually loves to say the exact opposite of the praise with a big smile. And if you focus too much on the praise, it can be very triggering.
Interesting. So can you give an example of like,
well, if I said that was so kind of you, he will start insisting, no, it's not. And then start saying the opposite. So if he's done something nice for his sister and I say, oh, that was very kind of you, he'll be like, no, it's not. It's horrible because she's horrible. And like,
so in that case, I'm gonna make some guesses here because I don't know your child, but it sounds like the self-esteem issue is that he believes he's created a story for himself that he's not a kind person. And so, not that he wants to keep that, but that's safe for him because that's what he really truly feels. So when you're trying to prove him otherwise, especially when we think of autism, we think of that black and white thinking a lot of the time. So if I'm not a nice person because people tell me I'm not, I must not be, and mom just said I'm a nice person, well, that's wrong, and this is why, right? So I would say that this is actually, and we'll keep working on the other parts of self-esteem, is maybe coming in more focusing on the other things than on praise specifically. But I think he's got a story for who he is, and he's trying to fight your new narrative, positive narrative. And it's not because he doesn't want to be good or feel that he's a kind person, right? It's just that
I think hearing praise is just, it's very uncomfortable for him. And my mother,
he doesn't believe it,
autistic,
probably.
My mom was autistic, and she very much hated getting praise. And it wasn't that she didn't know she was kind, it's that she didn't want to hear it in the moment because she didn't know how to respond. So it was easier to respond with, no, I'm not, or, oh, that's nothing, or like dismissive, because it's hard to take that praise in.
And that's a social norm actually for us, right? When someone says, wow, you look pretty today, you're like, no, I just did my hair. Or, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's a social thing that we have an issue with. I remember a woman said to me once, a compliment is a present, so say thank you. That's why it's called a compliment is a present. And I was like, oh, never thought of it that way. Because we make excuses, right?
But then he feels it's a demand to say thank you for getting a compliment.
Yeah, like, well, he doesn't have to say thank you, but yeah. I just mean like, but
that's what it feels like. Yeah, it's weird.
That new way of looking at it for me was just like, oh, I didn't think of, you know, because taking it, like, we just think like, oh, if I say it, then that must mean it's true. Like, if I acknowledge the thing, then now I'm saying it's true, and that's might make me look, you know, arrogant or all these negative things. So I think that is something that's an issue in society for sure. But like you said, you've identified a trigger, right? So when we go back to expect it, praise is not something that's going to work for your kid. So you're not going to do that. That's not of the 4 that I'm going to go over, you're going to do, right? Because you're expecting.
Awesome. That. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense then. Awesome. Don't push it if it ain't working.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You all are experts on your own child, and you know what works and what doesn't. And that's why I started this off by going, we need to expect it. We need to meet them where they're at and say, this is what my kid likes. Because some kids too, when we start to get kind of scriptive in the way we say stuff, like an example you hear in all the books will be like, I'll be like, honey, I see that you're getting angry. And our smart kiddos are going to be like, don't tell me what you see. You know, like, I know what you're doing. And that's triggering for them, right? Because they're smart and they know what we're doing. So that's why we have to know, okay, I'm not going to say it that way. I got to drop that, right? The second we're called on this isn't working, we don't do that anymore.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That was a good question. All right. So moving on to C, stop comparing to others. Do not compare your children to other children, but do point out personal growth. So an example of that. So my 5-year-old easily escalated emotional roller coaster, probably on par with most 5-year-olds. But what will happen is, okay, example, we play a game. We'd run around. She'd like, I'm mommy, play a game to wash my face. I'm like, okay, great. But every time I caught her, she would cry because the game's over, right? She said the game's over. And I was like, well, I don't want to play this game because every time I catch you, you cry. Like, that's not fun. And so what would happen is, one time I caught her and I go, oh, you didn't cry this time. Or, oh, you only cried for a minute. Right. And I pointed out, oh, you only cried for a minute. So I'm just noticing, right? Oh, yeah. And she's like, I did only cry for a minute. And now when we play the game, every time, even though she hasn't cried like the last 20 times, she'll go, see, mommy, I didn't cry. And I'm like, that's right. Great for you. Right. So that stop comparing to others can also go to just pointing out that personal growth. Like, when a child has if you have a child who has tantrums, who has big escalations, next time their escalation isn't so big, point out, be like, wow, honey, you only cried for 5 minutes. Way to go. Like, last time was 10, you know, like, wow, we still got out the door on time. Right. So you're noticing and pointing out those things. Now, going back to the comment earlier, well, they don't like praise. Well, you don't have to say it in a praiseful way. Like, it doesn't have to be praise. You're just noticing, like, wow, that only took 5 minutes. You don't have to high five. You're like, wow, that only took 5 minutes. Or, hey, you didn't cry this time. You're just pointing out little bits. But again, that kind of stuff, noticing or pointing things out, triggers your kid. You're not going to use that one. But for some, that might help instead of praise. D, model the behavior. Compliment yourself and give yourself pep talks. So again, for the child that's triggered when you're engaging with them, trying to build their self-esteem, especially because they're smart and they might be knowing what you're trying to do, and they're like, I'm not going to play that game. Just do it yourself. Model the behavior. So you could say, wow, normally I get really frustrated when you don't brush your teeth, but I'm feeling pretty calm right now. Right? Give yourself that stuff. So they're noticing you're doing it. You're talking about yourself. It's not about them. Because for some kids, when you do praise them or you're noticing that personal growth, it's almost like you have a flashlight and you're flashing it on them, and they don't like that. I don't want to be the center of attention. I don't like this being about me. So make it about you, right? So turn it on yourself. Was there some other questions? I saw a hand kind of pop up, and then I don't know if it's still there, but.
I don't think there's a hand. There's a handful of questions, but they're
Okay.
probably better.
We can wait. All right, great. So building self-efficacy. Okay, so that was the self-esteem bit. Those are some ideas. Of course, there's a million other ideas. We can do a whole workshop, but I'm just trying to give you a couple. Building self-efficacy. Provide opportunities. Remember, self-efficacy is belief that they can do stuff. Provide opportunities. Encourage your child to try different things at least once, but provide a time limit for their commitment. So I hear all the time from parents, they're like, they don't want to do it. They don't want to sign up for Girl Guides, or they don't want to do hockey because they're afraid you're going to make them do it if they don't like it. They're not going to be able to get out. Often part of it. So if you relieve that stress, right? Anxiety goes, uh-oh, commitment. I don't want to commit to something that I'm not sure about. I don't really want to do. So I'm just not going to do it. Avoid, 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 right? That's anxiety's job, is to avoid. So you say to the child, hey, I noticed you really love jumping on the trampoline all the time. Would you want to try gymnastics? We'll sign you. It's a 3-month thing, but you only have to go for the month. And if you hate it at the end of the month, then we'll pull you out. Now, some parents will say, yeah, but aren't I teaching my child to quit something? You're like, no, you're not, because you've set the parameters. You're going to make them go for that month. That's the understanding. So you're not going to pull them out after one try. You guys are going to come up with, and I should have said that first, you guys are going to come up with the time limit. So they want to be on board, right? You say, okay, how many times do you think it's going to take to go to gymnastics to decide if you like it or not? I don't know, like twice. You might be like, I feel like twice isn't good enough. Because what if you just were like really hungry both those days? What about a whole month, right? You collaborate, decide, both agree how long it's going to be, shake on it, whatever you got to do. And then you hold them to that agreement. So even though it's not the full, soccer ended up being like all the way in spring and stuff. And I was like, what? I thought it was just a couple months. But anyway, you got to figure out what it is, agree on it so that they're feeling comfortable, and then you do it. Okay. Because especially with that ADHD brain, short term, it's all about short term goals. Long term is too long. It's scary. And I don't know. But the now, right? Present. So, hey, we're just going to try this. So this could even be implementing a new thing in the home that you're doing, and you're doing it for 2 weeks, right? You're trying to make them small and attainable. The next one is feedback. So provide effort-based praise or support for, or like new ideas, like feedback on their new ideas, whatever it is. Like, wow, that's a really interesting idea. Wow, I would have never thought of that idea. So again, if they're triggered by praise, you don't have to say like, wow, that's a great idea. You could just say like, oh, that's a really interesting idea. Oh, I never thought about that. Huh, what an idea, right? So it's not a direct praise. You're just highlighting that they had this idea, or whatever the effort is that they're putting in. So the concept is like, hey man, I know that you really didn't want to go to gymnastics those last 2 classes. Like, I know we agreed on a month, you only wanted to go twice, but you went 4 times. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that. So there's feedback about the effort. You're saying you appreciate it. Again, I'm still trying to keep in mind the concept of, if praise doesn't work, if you're not going, you can say good job. Some kids love praise. Some kids love it. You're like, way to go, dude. You did it. You persevered. High five. We never have to talk about gymnastics again, right? And they're like, thank God. So whatever works. Teach problem solving skills. Again, that's like a whole lesson right there on how to do it. But does your child know how to problem solve? Or are you the one always solving the problem? When I worked at the Youth Detox, working with kids 13 to 18, so many of them had no idea how to make a good decision. I was like, well, what do you do? Like, if you're trying to make a good decision, what's step 1? They're like, I don't know. I just do what I want to do in the moment. Like, maybe that's part of why we're here today, right? So teach the problem solving skills. Don't take that away from your kid. Work with it. Work with them on it. And you can pick little things in the house, like, what should we have for dinner? I don't know. Yeah, me neither. So let's start by going to the fridge and see what we got in there. Let's gather some information. Okay, honey, open the fridge. What's in there? What kind of meat do we have? What kind of vegetables, right? Get them a part of that. And again, trying to use examples that of course you can use for all ages, but a lot of people, adults even, don't know problem solving, like how to do it. So let them be a part of it. Don't swoop in and fix the problems because they're not learning anything from that. And the last one is the positive self-talk, that I can't right now versus the I will versus I can't, right? So when a kid's saying I can't, you can say like, well, yeah, I know you can't right now. You don't want to correct necessarily because correction can be a big trigger for kids. So like if they say I can't, you're like, don't say that. You mean you can't right now? Like that's annoying, right? But you can just, if they say I can't do it. You're like, well, I can't right now, but that's okay, right? Super casual correction that's not seen as a correction. You're just rewording it. You're kind of rephrasing it for them, not making it about, oh, you didn't say that right. All right, so that's it for the self-efficacy. Anything else popping up that we want to address now? I see there's a Q&A and chat. Interesting. I don't know what the difference is, but we'll find out later.
There's a whole discussion happening in the chat, and so everyone has access to that. A couple of other resources have been shared as well. I think the questions are more general, so I don't want to get you off your track there. So we'll worries. But oh, there is a hand up.
Okay, let's check it out.
Noelle, go ahead. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Perfect.
I actually didn't mean to have my hand up.
Oh, you did? Okay.
No
all
problem.
Good. We're playing around, clicking things. It's all good. All right. So here we go. Okay, so self and co-regulation. Here's the stuffs. Here we go. And to be honest, guys, I feel like often when I do workshops, I do a lot of Q&A and like get into all the things. I'm kind of flying through the slides, but because I also really want to make sure we have time for the Q&A, because I think that's where we get a lot of extra really good learning done, because it's more specific, because it's super general. So self and co-regulation. How can we expect a child to regulate when we aren't regulated ourselves? Okay, this goes back to us, people. And I need you guys to know that because of my ADHD, I am constantly dysregulated and I constantly struggle with self-regulation, okay? So I am not sitting here on a high horse going, guys, come on, everyone just needs to, no. I have to work on this every single day. And I'm not perfect. I lose it, okay? So it happens. It's okay. We have to also forgive ourselves because we can't be perfect all the time. And I'll tell you, I can never be perfect, so. But here's the biggest thing. How can we expect our child to regulate when we ourselves aren't regulated? Okay, it's constant. We always are like, well, why can't they? Why can't, but are you regulated? And when I end up talking with parents, often I'll have one parent going, love you, honey, but you're doing the yelling, and then the parent's like, yes, I know, right? So there's often a caregiver that's also dysregulated when you have a child that's constantly dysregulated. So we got to reflect on that. And this is not about pointing fingers or playing the blame game. It just means needs to work on how to regulate themselves so that they can be regulated to help their child regulate. So we can't just help our child regulate if we're not regulated. So my little slogan is challenging behavior is the symptom of the problem. So earlier you heard Nikki share that I specialize in challenging behaviors, but really that's just the symptom. And that's my first thing is I say, you know what? I don't even really need to hear about your challenging behavior, because honestly, a parent can sit in a session for 50 minutes talking about all the challenging behaviors. To me, it's like, but why are they doing that? Okay. We need to figure out the why. So we can go all the way back to accept it, expect it, prepare for it. Okay, people? So we're going all the way back. Symptom of the problem. What the problem actually is, not the challenging behavior, but why. Accept it, expect it, prepare for it. Here we go. The child's response to a trigger isn't the issue. The reason they are triggered is the problem. So they're triggered, okay? And we're like, but why are they triggered? And sometimes we don't know. And that's the hardest thing, right? We need to do some discovery. We have to have some conversations. Now, when your child becomes a teenager, it can be really hard to get conversations happening with your teenager, right? What you're really lucky for those of you who have children 12 and under, you still have a pretty big window, and I'm not saying all, because again, generalizing here, everybody's different and unique and special, is that you probably have a bit more time to have those conversations because your kid's still interested in talking to you. My teenagers, sometimes it's hard to get your kids to share. So let's talk about the regulation process. I see a hand, but I'm going to address that at the end of number 4 today. So number 1, trigger. The thing that causes emotional dysregulation for your child. Example, a change in plans. Okay, you change the plans, child's trigger. Stage 2, rumbling. This signals that the child is becoming dysregulated. They might start yelling, right? They're starting to yell. You're starting to see some behaviors. Now, I work with a lot of parents who say, my child does not rumble. They just go from 1 to 3, which is explosion. Your child is unable to listen to reason. Okay, you need to know this. When your child is exploding, they can't listen to reason. So stop talking. Like literally stop using words. At this point, there's no point in talking. So example is, despite how much they love their video games, they throw their console, right? So you come in, your kid, they're playing their game, and you're like, hey, honey, I know I said I'd take you to DQ tonight, but we can't. And then they're like, what? What do you mean I can't? I'm like, sorry, honey, we just can't do it tonight. It's just not going to work out. So they've already started rumbling, like, what do you mean, right? And then they throw their video console, even though a game console, even they love it. They love this thing. So there's no reason anymore, right? There's rational brain's gone. And what happens is often parents are trying to rationalize with their child during rumbling and explosion. They're like, well, honey, it's just not going to work out right now. Like, I'm too busy. We can't do it. Like, I just can't. Like, I wish I could, but I can't. All that is like, you know, we're on, you know, I forget what that show is, but you know, they go, wow, 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 wow. That's what you're doing. So we need to, our job right now is to help our child regulate, not explain stuff and get into all that. So stage 4, after the explosion, is the I have to move my little thing, de-escalation phase. The child appears to be calming down. Example, they have slower breathing. They might just be crying, sobbing, okay? But not like, ah, but just like, right? Like, so they're starting to regulate. That's processing, right? The realization of what just has happened, they became like, well, I don't know, my game is broken and I didn't mean to, right? So they're coming down. They're not at de-escalated fully, but they're the de-escalation phase, okay? So there's this like, you know, and then they're starting to come down. When your child is in any of these stages, when they're triggered, the rumbling, explosion, their de-escalation, it's not the time to rationalize, okay? It is not the time to problem solve. Because that's what we want to do as parents. We want to problem solve. We want to stop the yelling or whatever's happening because we want to, so we're just going to try to problem solve and blah, 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 blah. No. So we're going to focus on regulation. What can I do to help my child be calm so their brain is capable of rationalizing? So the hand that was there before, does someone wanted to pop in with a question, or shall we come back to that later? Here we go.
I can ask the question. You can tell me if you want to answer it later.
Sure.
Because we're parenting children that have ADHD, and a lot of the time our kids are going to be at school, and all this stuff that we provided for them at home is going to go out the window, or is going to be very dependent on the education of the teacher, of the counselor, of the system. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious if you can also give us some suggestions as parents, when to advocate. Do we advocate? There's a lot of emphasis on self-advocacy, but then, you know, kids are overwhelmed and we're asking them to self-advocate. So
for sure, I'd love to speak to that as an educator myself.
Yeah.
So I absolutely, you want to be involved as much as you can. You're advocating for your kid constantly. So my daughter's 5, she's just entered kindergarten, and they give you a little thing about like, tell me about your kid. I full on sounded like I was writing an IEP, which is an individualized education plan, because I write those. I was like, okay, these are, yeah, right. I'm like, these are the adaptations I would prefer for you to, like, I just got in there, right? And I went to parent teacher, and sorry, I'm using an example, but I went to parent teacher interviews yesterday, and the teacher was like, yeah, you know what? I had one incident because she's a little bit oppositional defiant. Her father is too. And I was like, she's like, I didn't see it. And then it came up and I was like, oh, I think she wrote about this in her thing. She said she went and she picked it up and she's like, oh, this is the one. And she's like, I used the thing and it was super helpful. And so I actually, during parent teacher, I gave her some more examples of wording we use at home. So I find teachers really appreciate scripts. Like, what's the language you use? Because your kid knows that. Like, my daughter loves problem solving. So we use the term problem solving. So when she's starting to get a bit escalated or she's doing something she shouldn't do, if I direct her, boom, she's escalated. She's triggered. Don't direct me. I know. So instead I'd be like, hey, this isn't working for me. Can we do some problem solving? And then she's like, yeah, problem solving. Okay, well, we could do this, or we could, like, she's into that. And so I've given the teacher that language and she's like, thank goodness. She even used it today in school. She was like, hey, honey, like, I'm not supposed to do the thing. So 100% send emails to the teacher going, hey, we're working on this at home. This really seems to work. Give them the stuff, right? And also, I actually do a more in-depth presentation of this. This is what I call my pre-presentation. I have a whole workshop on this. And one of the big things is we talk about having a co-regulator at school. So identifying early on, who is the co-regulator at school? Is it an EA? Is it a VP? Is it the teacher? Who is your child's co-regulator? How can you encourage that relationship? And what skills do they have to help regulate your child when they're having these
well, let me tell you, it's not the math teacher. And unfortunately, and we just started high school. So, again, it's with an age difference. It sometimes is age specific.
But the counselor can be, right? I work as a high school counselor and I have kids who know that if they're starting to get to rumble, because by high school, we're teaching them to know that they're rumbling. So they start to go, I know I'm going to explode.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Come down. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, then they'll know that I'm going to explode and they'll go down to the counseling office. And sometimes they'll just come and chill. They won't talk to anyone because they don't want to talk, but they know they can just chill there.
Yeah. I have one of those smart kids. So the counselor has to be smarter than my kid. That's
multiple counselors, so they can find one. They can look. There's a bunch of them.
Yeah, multiples. Yeah. That's right. Not just tell them to stay positive.
Yeah. Sorry, I see some other hands. If that's okay for now,
of course. Thank you.
Awesome. You're very welcome.
That's great. So Helen, if you want to talk, that'd be great.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so like in my case, because I work with clients that have a combination like concurrent disorders, right?
Yeah.
Like combination of ADHD with autism, with schizophrenia, and all manner of combination. So I've worked with a couple of them. Like, will you do anything differently if you're working with an adult? So most of my clients are adults.
Yeah.
So what will you do differently? Because I find even though I utilize the same process, like essentially I'm looking at what you're saying about the kids and even the adults that I work with are exactly the same thing because of the concurrent disorders, right? Combination of autism and the other stuff. So put them at the age of a child, right? Even though they're grown adults, maybe in their 60s or as the case might be. Is there anything you do differently? What will you recommend for people like myself that work with adults?
So I'll answer as best I can in the moment, but because this presentation is focusing more on kids, right? It's about parenting or working with youth. I personally don't work with a lot of adults. So I can't say from experience, I can give you a lot of examples because I specifically work with youth with ADHD and their parents who also often have ADHD, but we focus on the parenting. So this is kind of, out of my wheelhouse, but I don't think that this should be any different, right? They're going to have more skills because they're older, their brain is more developed, but all of this is the same. Like this regulation process this is exactly what happens for every human. And again, it's not because they're neurodiverse. Every human is triggered, rumbled, explosion, de-escalation. That's just across the board. Again, it just depends on maturity level, brain function, all of those things on what are the examples I'm using you might actually use. So I'm going to keep going through and then we'll see if more things come up that you're like, I feel like you've answered it. Otherwise we can come back to it. Okay.
Thank you.
So co-regulation, which leads to self-regulation. So often I find parents of youth who are teenagers There's some frustration in that they're like, my child should be able to self-regulate. There is no should. And again, this is for all children. Doesn't matter what their neurotype is. Meet your child where they're at. If they need you to co-regulate with them and they're 15, 16, 17, that's fine. But what you want to do is that my little mantra is do with, not for. So you don't want to be doing stuff with them. So they're learning the skills so that they can eventually get to stage 2, stage 3. So stage 1 is kind of like you're there doing, you're specifically guiding. Stage 1 is guiding. Stage 2 is, you're doing it with them with a little bit of guidance. Stage 3 is when they can do it on their own. So number 1, plan. What is your plan for when the trigger occurs? When you have a small child, you're going to be doing more of the planning on your own. But as they get older, my 5-year-old is part of this, right? As your child gains language skills, gains communication skills, and in some cases they don't gain language, right? So a lot of youth who have ADHD, or I shouldn't say a lot, just some youth who have ADHD also have autism and never become verbal, right? So that can be hard, but they can still be part of the planning process. There's still other ways of communication, right? So number 1 is plan. What is the plan for when the trigger occurs? What are you going to do about it? Like maybe the trigger is every morning we always fight before we have to go to school. Okay, what happens? So let's stop being mad about it and let's expect it and let's make a plan, right? So number 1, plan. Number 2, before. Okay, so you got your plan. You're like, okay, great. I got this plan. It's going to be great. It's not always going to be great, friends. We think it's going to be. And that's why I love counseling, because we'll make a plan and parents are always so excited. Like they think their whole lives are going to change after our first session. They come back, they're like, so some of it worked and some didn't. I'm like, that's what we expect, right? So we got our plan. Number 2, before. How do you avoid the trigger? So if it's the morning and everyone's like, flipping their lid, how do you avoid that? What's going on? Is it the time crunch? Well, then people need to get up earlier. People need to be doing stuff before bed. Like, as much as you don't want to, you just kind of have to. I mean, as parents, we do stuff we don't want to do all the time. So we got to that's got to be the thing. So how can I avoid the trigger? Or is there something that maybe doesn't actually have to be done? For example, if you're fighting with your kid every morning about making their bed worth it? That's what I want to know. Is it worth it? If it's worth it for you, have fun with the fight every morning. But if it's not worth it, stop asking them to do it in the morning. Maybe get them to do it later, right? So what happens is we have these ideas of what things should be. And then we try to go, we need it to be this way. And then it's not that way. And then we get upset about it. And then we keep pushing and pushing. And it's like, this is the classic counselor responses. And how is that working for you? It's not. So let's stop doing it. So let's avoid the trigger. If the trigger is always that your child can't pick what shoes they want to wear, then pick the shoes the night before, or get rid of all the other pairs that aren't like nice shoes that don't fit properly. Just get rid of them. Just have one pair of shoes, right? So how can you avoid? Step 3, or during, what can you or they do to calm their nervous system? Okay, so this goes back to the regulation, goes back to what we were saying here. Remember I said in the regulation process, you're not problem solving, you're trying to regulate. So 3 is the big one. To calm their nervous system. What are your options? 4 is after, okay? So once child de-escalated, it's after, what supports or conversations need to happen? Some kids, like I mentioned way at the beginning, some youth are like 15 minutes, 20 minutes later, they're just like, it's like it never happened. Like, what? You were losing it. Now you're just fine? Yeah. So maybe now's a good time to be like, so what happened? I'm still having a hard time understanding why you were so upset. And they can be like, well, I was upset because of this. Now my 5-year-old, she will explode. So I get really dysregulated with the screaming, the noise, because I have sensitivity to sound, part of my ADHD. So we have an agreement in the house that if she really needs to scream a lot because it triggers me, that she'll go into her room, scream, and then she'll come back. So what we'll do is she literally will hug. Our self-regulation for my 5-year-old is I try to hug her and we rub her back and I deep breathe to trigger her deep breathing. So I don't ask her to deep breathe because she gets upset. If I say, let's do deep breathe, I don't want deep. So I just, And if she still feels like she needs to scream, she'll literally walk into the room and scream. And then she'll come back for more hugs, or she'll scream and she'll come back regulated. And she'll come back and go, Mommy, I was just really upset that I couldn't have the ice cream. And I'm like, I know, honey. So now she's ready for problem solving. She's just come in and told me why she was upset. So she's ready to go. So every kid is different. Now, I just spoke to a somatic therapist the other day, and she told me, which I didn't know, that children, depending on age, the younger, the longer, can take up to 24 to 48 hours for their system to regulate. And specifically in scientific terms, I like the word scientific because it's not a word, but I say it anyway, is that it's about the cortisol. She said you got to have like the cortisol has to come down so the serotonin can go back up. So as much as we like to think maybe we're regulated, if our cortisol hasn't come down and our serotonin hasn't come up, we're not regulated yet. And so that can take 24 to 48 hours. So sometimes we really want to problem solve. We really want to talk about the thing, especially if we've been emotionally abused. Okay. I want to be honest, guys. Some of us are being emotionally abused by our children. Some of us are being physically abused by our children, right? And so sometimes we need to just wait for the problem solving. We just need to wait for that science to happen in the body before we can enter that problem solving. So again, what supports or conversations need to happen? Is there something that like, wow, she was throwing things around? Okay, so we got to talk about what supports. Like we need to have a way for her to scream into a pillow so she's not, screaming outside and scaring the neighbors, or right? Like start to think about what other things can we implement here if this is how things are going. So going to the plan stage, collaborate with your child and all primary caregivers to come up with a plan for how your child wishes to be best supported by you when they're dysregulated. So we're going back just so you know what we're doing. We're going back to this number one, right? So number one, this is the plan. Also come up with a list of things your child can try to do to help them regulate in the moment. So what are the things they like? Do they like deep breathing? No. Do they like to, a favorite one is throwing a ball. So kids who can be aggressive, like punching or hitting, sometimes they need a release of energy or yelling. It's like a release of energy. So they'll grab a ball and I'll get them to like bounce a tennis ball. So you get to kind of release the energy without hurting anybody. Suggestions. So use the collaborative problem solving approach. If you haven't heard of Dr. Ross Green, he does the CPS model. I'm a big fan. He's got a lot of great books. So I definitely my little plug for him. You can also create an if-then plan. An if-then plan is basically, if this thing happens, then this is what's going to happen, right? But not like more so like, oh, sorry, this sneezes. They just really want to come. If, my daughter starts screaming, then I'm going to offer her a pillow. I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to hand her a pillow. Because again, the talking can be triggering. I'm just going to hand her a pillow and she knows what that means and she'll scream into the pillow, right? So coming up with those kinds of things. Stage 2 we talked about is that avoiding the trigger. So think back to the times you said, why do you always, or why do they always when you're talking about? The trigger keeps happening, so that's a trigger of theirs. Now, what is the antecedent to that? How can you avoid that antecedent, right? Sometimes you can't. Maybe it triggers school. Maybe it triggers a person, right? But sometimes you can. So this is only talking about the times that you can avoid a trigger. Frequent trigger alert. The alert isn't connect before you direct, but the trigger itself, the frequent trigger is direction, okay? We have smart kids. They don't want to be told what to do. I know. Don't tell me what to do. Or they're in the middle of something. They're hyper-focused and we're asking them to do this thing and now they're triggered because I was in the thing and you just took my focus away and you know how hard it is for me to get focused, right? They're triggered. So before you direct your child, connect. Focus on connection. Example, your kiddo is playing a video game and they have not taken out the garbage. And they were supposed to have taken out the garbage. They're playing a video game. We want to walk in and go, James, you didn't take the garbage out. Can you go take the garbage out? Or you might even be kinder than that and be like, hey, James, honey, I need you to take out the garbage. Instead, you're going to come in the room and you're going to be like, hey, James, like, what are you doing? Playing Minecraft. Oh, cool. What are you doing in Minecraft? I don't know, I'm doing this thing, Mom, I'm busy. Well, that right there is a trigger, or sorry, a hint. If they give you that little, I'm busy, then now's not a good time to direct. If you can, wait, because you're likely to get, you know, an emotional explosion because they're already, they're doing a thing. So if they're like, oh yeah, Mom, I'm busy thing. You're like, okay, James, I just need to talk to you. Can I come back in 5 minutes? Right? Give them some sort of warning. Like, you're coming back. You're going to be expecting to talk. So you come back in 5 minutes. Now you might be like, my kids still won't be ready. So you'd be like, hey, James, I want to talk that thing. And he's like, no, I'm still doing the thing. Okay. So you're going to sit there. You can sit there and be like, oh, what are you doing? You're looking, you're connecting. Oh, you're doing, oh, is that okay? Cool, cool. Then they're like, oh, okay. What do you want? What do you want? And you're like, I'm just wondering if you could when you could take out that garbage. That's my favorite way of saying it. I'm wondering when you can. Okay. Because then they're setting themselves, because we're learning, they're setting themselves a time that it has to be done. They're now committing to a time. You're not bugging them. They're going, I will when I'm done. You're like, okay, honey, I need a time. I don't know, 6:45. Okay, great. If it's 6:45 and you forget and you're still gaming, is it okay if I remind you? Sure. Okay, whatever. They just gave you permission to remind them. So now you're not stepping in there, right? You've actually, when you come in at 6:45, you're like, hey, honey, you forgot. They're like, oh yeah, I know. Okay. Right? Versus like, leave me alone, I'm playing a game. So there's all these little steps you can do to avoid the trigger. But connection is a really big one. Really starting with like, hey, how are you? What's going on? Hey, what are you up to? What are you doing? Checking it out. Even just sitting with them and seeing what they're doing. Because also they don't want you hovering, because they're going to be, what do you want? Right? But now they're like, okay, sweet. Now I can talk. Right? But if you just come in there with the direction, often a trigger. So I put in examples of, why do you always cry, fight before we leave the house in the morning? That's the symptom of the problem. The antecedent is being rushed. That's the actual problem. They don't want to be rushed. So you avoid it. Get your child up earlier so they have more time, get as much done before they go to bed. There's, you know, so there's not as much to do in the morning, that kind of stuff. Okay. Connect and discuss. Okay. This was the other stage. So reconnect with your child. You might need apologies, hugs, forgiving words to alleviate anxious thoughts and guilt. So when a child has an explosion, they often feel quite guilty after, okay? They may be really good at covering it up, but they're usually feeling pretty bad, especially if they have said some mean things or maybe broken something. There's usually some guilt that happens, and all that stuff builds up, and that's what affects their self-esteem negatively. So we wanna make sure after an explosion happens, we're connecting and we are what I call righting any wrongs. So, you know, there's apologies happening, or saying, you know what, you know, you did this. So what can you do to make that better? Oh, I guess I'll have to use my, you know, allowance to pay back, blah, blah, blah for this. Yeah, sure. Okay, great. You know, so they're righting the wrong. They're feeling good. Discuss what happened. Like, yeah, like you might not know why they were so upset. Or you could be like, look, I know, like, that was not okay that I interrupted your game. You're right. I knew that you always meet your friends at 6:30 to do the thing. And that was a really bad time for me to be interrupting you. And they're like, oh, okay, great. Identify what you both wish were different in that situation. So you could say like, I wish I had waited. And they're probably like, I wish you had waited too. Or they'd be like, well, I just wish you just, you know, like didn't start yelling from the other room. You could have just came in and talked to me. And you're like, oh, perfect. I didn't know that was the problem. Collaborate on what to do next time. So, okay, next time, what do we got to do here? We don't want that to happen again. How's that going to work? There we go. Perfect. So that's all my things. So again, these are all very general things. I have like more in-depth workshops on each, but these are just things to start to get you going and thinking, okay, how can I do this? What do I want to be working on right now? So I got my little thank you page up. So if you're looking to connect, that's my email. I also have a little Instagram that's Parenting Youth with ADHD, and that's just our website there. But now is the time we can ask some questions, answer questions.
Great. I just put your link in the chat as well. So the website link is there. And I've got a few questions here that have come in. So let me just find them. And there's a couple different locations. So first of all, a bunch of people want to know if the slides are available afterwards.
Right. You know what? And I am so sorry. I forgot to say that they would not be available. And I should have done that at the front and said, take screenshots. So you know what I'm going to do right now is while I'm answering questions, I'm going to put up the screens and you guys can take screenshots or get your phone. I'm totally fine with that, but I'm not providing the actual PDFs because I'm going to use these again and again. And then I just don't want them floating around the world, if that makes sense.
Perfect.
So I will slowly do that, guys.
So the question that came up way back in the beginning, I'll just come back to really quickly. Do you have guidance on how to talk to your child pre-pediatrician visit to prepare them for the first appointment? My son is 13 years old.
So I just did a workshop last week and a very similar question came up about the dentist. So it's real. I love stories. Okay. So it depends on your child. Some kids love stories too. Remember, creative thinkers. And so we'll play the worst case scenario game, middle case and best case. So talking about, okay, if they're nervous about the pediatrician, you'd be like, okay, let's pretend we're going to pediatrician, worst thing ever happened. And I know you say it's 13, but still that's usually fine. They're usually into it. Like, okay, what is the worst thing that can happen? Let's start at the beginning. You walk in there and then what? I don't know, the pediatrician smells bad. You're like, oh yeah, smell bad. Okay. Then what happens? Well, you probably have to like go into a room. So let's say you go into the room and then they won't let you come in with me. Oh, okay. Because while they're telling this problem story, while they're telling the problem story, you're getting hints on what they're actually afraid of, right? We got to figure out what the actual problem is so that you can address them. So as you're doing worst case scenario, they're going to think of all these like hilarious or just terrible things. And you're going to keeping a mental note of what those are. Then you move to the next one and you're like, hey, so what would be not as bad? And then when they do the best case scenario story, they're doing their own problem solving, right? They're saying, well, this could happen. And now they've imagined it. Because what we want them to do is we want them to really imagine that it could go really well for them. Because right now they're just focusing on the negative and the bad, the scary story. And that's why we want to finish with the good story, because we want them to actually play it out and go like, I guess that's possible. It's like, yeah, right? That's possible. I mean, all of them are possible. Like if we have a kid with a really rational brain, like I was always a very rational person in the end, we'll be like, okay, well, what's like the likelihood that the worst case scenario happens? They'll be like, probably like 2%. You're like, right. And then they start to think, okay, rational brain, because anxiety is all about, it's scary, avoid. And we don't want anxiety to win. Okay. We can't let it win. So let's think of what's the best case. And then going, I mean, how likely is it best case scenario is going to happen? I mean, probably not 100% either. So let's prepare for it. So it's really just playing out the scenarios, finding out what your kid's really worried about, and then coming up with it. Because maybe your kid just wants you to be in the room with them, but they don't know how to just say that to you, right? But they've just played it out in their story and you're like, oh, okay. You're like, oh, honey, we can just ask. Hopefully that was helpful.
That's great. I've got a couple more and then some hands are coming up. So I'm going to try and address a whole bunch of them.
Good luck, Nikki.
Yeah, well, we'll see how it all goes. At what age do you expect kids' brains to be able to manage their emotions, self-management?
That's not a thing. I don't do that. I do that whenever your kid does. This whole concept of at what age, I think is not helpful. And I know that I'm just doing another workshop on neurodiversity and just understanding that. And we have what we call developmental milestones, right? Certain ages you're supposed to be able to do certain things. Some people will never be able to do the thing, right? So emotional regulation. I still have problems with emotional regulation. I mentioned earlier, I started seeing a somatic therapist. I'm like, I want to learn more about my body stuff. What's going on? And I'm a professional telling you guys about self-regulation, right? So I don't believe in certain ages of the things. There's parts of the brains that are more developed at a certain time. Like the whole brain is supposed to be fully developed around 26 years old. Okay. But different parts are going to mature at different stages. So people with ADHD are going to be, I think the rule of thumb is supposed to be about 3 to 4 years behind in the areas that people with ADHD struggle with. So for example, emotional regulation or executive functioning skills. Actually just wanted to say, I heard this on a podcast. I loved it. When you have a brain that functions the way mine does, my ADHD brain, it's not that necessarily all the parts aren't working. It's that they don't necessarily know how to work together. And the way that the person on the podcast said it, they said it's like having a full orchestra and everyone knows how to play their thing. So that's kind of what happens in adulthood. Everyone knows how to play their thing, but the conductor doesn't know what he's doing. And the conductor's over here and he's like, oh, wait, no, you guys. No, you guys. So the conductor's not actually telling the part to chime in. It's your turn, right? So the conductor is the part, that's that executive functioning, really saying, okay, now you need to do this. Now you need to do this. So there's some issues with that part too. Anyway, so I'm sorry I didn't have a full answer for you, a scientifical, because remember my new favorite word, that's not a word, answer. But I would just say just meet your kid where they're at. It doesn't matter. shouldn't matter.
I've got a question here. What if you can't avoid the trigger?
Yes. Remember I said earlier, I said, this only works if you can avoid the trigger. Well, I gave you all the stuff. What if you can't avoid the trigger?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So
ADHD and anxiety often present as comorbidities among children, youth, and adolescents. Do you have any tips on how to differentiate between the two in 1 to 2 sessions using SFBT?
I was distracted by trying to make my slides so people could take pictures. So going back to, okay, anxiety and ADHD are often together. Yes. And then what was the rest of the question?
Do you have any tips on how to differentiate between the two in 1 to 2 sessions using SFBT?
I don't actually know what SFBT means. And this, like, maybe you could put it in there. But what I was going to say is, so solution focused therapy is what you're trying to say. Sorry, give me 2 seconds. So solution focused therapy is, well, there's no solution in 2 sessions. No. I would focus on the understanding of, oh, this is my other thing I didn't get to say. I love this, saying this too. I feel like I made this up myself, but maybe I heard it somewhere. So when I'm trying to describe to a client what's like ADHD and anxiety, okay? So anxiety is a mental health disorder and ADHD is a neurotype, okay? So what I explain to them is I go, look, in our brain, we have roads, and the roads are the neurons, and that's your neurotype, okay? It's the type of roads that you have. And on those roads are FedExes with packages of information. And that is your mental health. That's the message, right? The message is it's time to be happy, time to be sad. This is scary. This is not. So I always try to explain to clients this concept of like, okay, if you have ADHD, you might have highways where other people have like city roads. And that's that fast processing. So your highway to your emotion, you have a highway for your emotions, right? You have a highway for how you understand visual things, right? Or you might actually have, slow school zones where other people have highways, or right. So it's all about the speed at which things happen and bumpy roads. Or is there not a road? Maybe there's no road there. Maybe it's just a dirty, dusty road. And it's like really hard to even try, right? And then there's the messengers. So the anxiety is that messenger bit. So there's this big talk about managing anxiety and ADHD. My personal belief is you manage the anxiety first, okay? Because often the ADHD causes the anxiety sometimes. But to me, ADHD is just a thing that you have, okay? It goes back to that neurodiversity for me. It's a thing that I have. It's just the way my brain works. But anxiety is something that is that I can actually, I hate to say fix because, can ebb and flow. But anxiety is something that doesn't need to be there all the time. ADHD is going to be there all the time. And that's what I want all parents to understand. ADHD will always be there. You cannot fix your child because they're not broken. Okay. But anxiety doesn't need to be there the whole time. So if you work on the anxiety, their ADHD symptom, and I don't want to use the word symptoms because that's part of my thing that I'm like, I don't find it a symptom. It's a characteristic of the parts that are hard for me because of my ADHD. Those parts might not be as hard because I'm regulated. The second I'm dysregulated, all the other things are hard to manage. So if I can manage my anxiety to be regulated, all the other stuff isn't as hard. So that's what I would focus on those 2 sessions, understanding the two, how they connect, and where you want to start. And that's focusing on that anxiety piece. And that would be kind of like a CBT, managing anxiety.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to let a couple of people talk and ask their questions, and I'll go to the Q&A section. So Shannon, feel free to bring your question forward.
Thank you. Hi, I was the one who was asking about my son and the impending pediatrician visit. I haven't even told him that the appointment is happening, so I'm not sure that I'm quite ready to even talk to him about the worst case, best case scenario. And when I was contacted by the clinic to make the appointment, even they didn't have any guidance on how to have a conversation with your kid about this, because I feel like he is really going to resist, and I'm not even sure how to broach this with him. So if you have any guidance, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
So this goes, no worries. This goes back to that collaborative problem solving approach, right? Like right now you're in the avoidance stage. Scary, avoid, not going to be helpful, right? So we need to address it. And that's the collaborative problem solving, is saying, like, it sounds like maybe he's had a bad experience. Like there's something in your mama heart that's going, I'm thinking this is going to be a problem. Now, remember, that's your anxiety too, right? Because you're assuming that it's going to go bad. So it's possible that it won't, but you know your kid. And so therefore it probably isn't going to go so great. But you have to remember that's also your stuff that you have to manage. So, okay, we have to talk about this thing. So let's figure it out. What is the problem for him? Why doesn't he want to go? What is scary for him? Maybe you don't want to get into the whole storytelling and just saying, hey, bud, like, is it that he's gone before? And it's like, what is it? Why do you think he's going to be scared? That would be helpful for me to know. Why do you think it's going to be a problem?
So he's currently undiagnosed, and so all we've had is a BASC assessment completed at school, and this is the first time we're meeting with the pediatrician. So okay. I just don't know what to say to him to tell him, hey, so remember that assessment? Now we're going to go and meet a pediatrician who, you know, I'm not going to say of course I do not say there's anything wrong with him, but to get to understand and to the root cause of perhaps some of the behaviors that we've been noticing, whatever the language is I can think of at the time. Of course, now that I'm on the spot, I can't say it clearly, okay. But
yeah.
So I just don't know what to say to him to introduce the fact that, hey, you have a pediatrician visit and this.
Yeah. Keep it simple, right? We don't have to get into, again, because what I'm hearing is anxiety in your voice, is that anxious, oh my gosh, all the terrible things, right? So you have to manage yours so that it's super casual, calm, cool. Because if he's sensing in you that you're nervous and you're not sure how to say it, he's going to pick up on that. Oh gosh, why are you, mom? Why are you worried? Is it weird? Is it bad? Is it right? So part of it is you're coming in cool, calm, casual, like, hey dude, we've got, I mean, again, you're obviously, you might not say dude, but whatever works for you, but coming in calm, cool, casual, be like, hey, so you know how we had that assessment stuff? We got to go talk to a pediatrician about what they learned so that we know more about what's going on for you, so that you can know stuff. Like, you don't have to get into all the because then he's going to be like, then he can ask the questions and then you can actually address the problem. Because what we don't want to do is create a problem by trying to say all this stuff that's now he's like, what? But if you just keep it super simple, he might be like, okay, right? We're just going to go talk to the pediatrician. All kids talk to doctors. Like, you've been to the doctor before. Remember that time you broke your leg, you went to the doctor? Like, we're just going to go to the doctor. Going to talk to us about some stuff. Yeah, but, and then whatever comes up for him, then you can start addressing the things, right? But I wouldn't try to make it too complicated, because I think that's going to be stressful for you. That's now stressful for him.
Yep, that's helpful. Simple. Okay. Yes.
Good. Yeah, keep it simple. Yeah, no worries.
I've got Catherine, if you want to bring your question forward.
Hi. So yeah, Mom here. I'm also a school counselor. I have a son who is 14, and there's been a ton of conflict in our relationship. And we're kind of at a point where there's a lot less conflicts, but there's also a lot less rules for him. And I'm kind of feeling like nervous about him kind of going off the rails, because we really have pulled back on a lot of our expectations of him, and one being like contributing to the household. Yeah, so he keeps his room clean, but he doesn't do any like household chores, or has very few expectations in terms of even eating dinner with us. So just curious about your thoughts on that piece. Like, is it worth trying to eliminating chores and rarely eating family dinners? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So this goes back to the very beginning of meeting your child where they're at. Okay. I heard you say that sometimes stuff's difficult in the relationship too. And for me, it's always, let's meet our child where they're at and focus on the relationship. When you have a good, like a healthy, good, positive relationship, your child's going to be motivated internally to do those things for you, right? Even though it's for the whole house, but they see it as doing it for you. Right? So part of it is going, okay, I got to meet them out there, right? This is what they're able to do. How can I bump it up one step? Because often we have a whole list of things we want them to be doing that they're not doing. So let's just like pick one thing that's one step farther from where we're at. But again, it goes back to that relationship. The other part is that concept of like, do they want like internal motivation? Is it important to them? They don't want to do things that aren't important to them. I mean, that's a typical teenage behavior, but also when you have ADHD, it's really hard. It's extra hard to do the things we don't want to do because we only have so much dopamine, right? And I don't want to waste, like lose out my dopamine by doing something that I don't care about. That's not important to me, right? Like I need to do school because maybe school is important to me because I need to do this thing. So I'm going to use up my last bit of feel good to get my homework done. I don't care about whatever that other thing is. So the way I describe it is we all have a cup, you know, we've heard our cup is half full. So we all have a cup and we do good things that make us feel good, you know, self-care, and we fill our cup. Now, when you have ADHD, you have a slow leak in your cup. So basically that's dopamine, and you're constantly leaking dopamine. Now, your brain's not actually constantly leaking dopamine. This is just a metaphor. So what happens is we need more dopamine. We need more feel good to do the hard stuff, because you might be able to do some self-care and walk around with your full cup and, like, you know, you do a little bit of pour out a little dopamine here and there doing things. But when you have ADHD and you're slow leaking, it's like, well, I don't want to waste it on this other stuff that I don't actually care about because it's so much hard enough for me to do the hard stuff. So we have to keep that in mind. So first one is meet your kid where you're at, focus on the relationship, build internal motivation for them to want to do the things, get them to understand and really feel like it's important to them that, AKA, their room is clean because my friend is coming over. Because you will be surprised if your kid actually cares when their friend comes over. Then let's meet them where they're at. Let's make sure they have a friend coming over once a week, and then they'll clean their room, right? So thinking of all those little tricks.
That's great. And I've actually got quite a few people wondering about medication. So is medication useful?
Okay, so I am not a doctor. I have to say that I'm not a doctor. I can't give medical advice. In my personal opinion about beliefs about medication, love it for those who need it. Okay, so it's all about recognizing, in my opinion, what is the actual problem here, right? Often we focus on symptoms, challenging behavior, So if we're focusing on the symptom, it's hard to decide if medication is right or not. So when you can actually get to the actual problem, like is the actual problem impulsivity? Is it actually impulsivity that's the problem here at play? Then medication is awesome. Okay, you can't counsel impulsivity like control into a person's brain. You just can't. That's the way the brain is functioning. So medication, great. But if it's actually an anxious response, maybe they're not doing stuff, maybe they're not doing anything, I want them to be doing more stuff, and maybe it's actually anxiety coming into play and they're feeling overwhelmed and they're not doing stuff. You don't want to give a child ADHD medication when it's actually an anxiety issue that's making them avoid, right? So my family is neurodiverse, like all of us have different things. I personally am not medicated because I don't need it to function. For me, it's like I said, I have this perfect mesh of ADHD that just worked out. But like for someone like, there's another person in my family that absolutely, I'm like, dude, medication, like it changes his life when he uses it. He's a whole other person. He can function. He feels good about himself. He can do things. Without it, he's scattered. And so he chooses to do it on work days, but not on the weekends because he doesn't need it, right? So for me, I think medication is wonderful when used for the proper purpose and when that purpose is being met.
So
sorry, I have to say one more thing. The other thing is research has shown, and parents, please hear me. Research has shown medicating your child decreases their chances of having addictions later in life. Okay, that's decreases. So a lot of parents think that, well, if I medicate my kid, they're more likely to become addicted. Absolutely not. Research has shown it's the opposite effect. Because if you don't medicate your child when medication would be beneficial to them, they will self-medicate. And that is what I learned in detox. I am telling you, I think every single kid, maybe the two of them, most children walking through the door at detox were neurodiverse and they were not medicated. And so they found drugs like meth or they found drugs like marijuana that helped them regulate, help them do stuff they couldn't do before, like cocaine, right? Like they found all these drugs that work for them. Like ADHD meds are stimulants. Do you really want your child to go find cocaine and meth instead? Like that's literally what they're saying is happening. And so they say if you medicate your child, research shows if you medicate your child younger, it can actually start changing the brain so they don't need the medication later. So it actually does start to create those synapses that were not there. Anyway, I have to say that part.
Okay, so many questions. What is the difference between ADHD and autism?
Okay, that's a whole thing. I couldn't
Okay.
get into that. That's like, you're gonna have to Google that one, or take one of the other workshops on that, because it is very different. There's some things that are like similar, but there's a lot of things that are different. So they're very different. So
Yeah.
that's a whole session. Sorry.
Okay, I've got this one here. It's a little lengthier. I have a youth with ADHD and he's in high school alternative program, getting into the wrong crowd, at risk of getting involved with criminal justice system. But he will not listen to me when I problem solve with him, guide him on the other path. I don't want to give up on him. What are the ways I can help support that doesn't involve words from problem solving, but more action based? Hope that makes sense.
Totally does. So those are my kids. Those are my detox. Right? That I used to work at the alternative school here. Okay, so this is a child at this stage who usually wants to be very independent. Okay, they're like, I don't want my parent to tell me what to do. This goes back to even my 5-year-old, right? That oppositional bit. Nope, I want to do it on my own. Okay, and this is the hardest stage, and this is why I'm always trying to reach parents before their kids get to the stage, because your hands get pretty tied as they get older. But this is when you start to think, where are the positive supports in my child's life that are not me? Is there a family member, an aunt or uncle or friend of yours who they've kind of connected with? How can you help build that relationship? It all goes back to relationship, right? Is also, you want to focus on building your relationship with your kiddo, not trying to problem solve or fix them, or you're just there to be a sounding board. Often our children will come to us with an issue and we think they want us to help solve it, but they don't. They just want you to listen. So the first step for building a relationship with your teen is authentic listening and empathic responses with zero problem solving. So anytime he comes home, he's like, oh, blah, blah's being such a jerk. And you're like, oh, that sucks. They're like, yeah, it does suck. And you're like, yeah, dude, like, are you okay? Yeah, fine. Great. Right? Like just little things like that. Because often you're like, well, they're not really talking to me. They do. They say stuff. So instead of problem solving, just empathy. Respond, summarize what they're saying so that because the big thing, I just posted this on my website. I do these little picture things. Children want to feel 3 things, people. They want to feel accepted, heard, and loved. And a lot of children need to feel accepted and heard to feel loved. And I want you all to think to yourself right now, which of those is your child struggling with, if any? Are they struggling with feeling accepted, or feeling heard, or feeling loved? So think, how often does your kid say, you don't listen, you never listen to me? Your child doesn't feel heard. So way to make them feel heard, focus on empathy. Do not problem solve with them unless they specifically ask, Mom, can you help me? Or Dad, can you help me with this? Okay. So are they not feeling accepted? Are you like, you could do better? Why aren't you doing this? Or, oh, why you say this? Or, I know this is just a phase. You're not accepting your child and they know it. So those are all basis that these challenging behaviors will stop once you get the basics sorted.
I have a question here. How young can you teach a kid to identify that they're rumbling?
I mean, I don't think there's a specific answer. I think this goes back to the brain, and everyone's a unique, beautiful flower. So I was trying to think, was my 5-year-old, does she know when she's rumbling? Well, yeah, because I told you, my 5-year-old, she'll go into the room. She knows she needs to scream. She'll go into her room. So that's me knowing that she knows she's going to scream, that she's going to explode. So she's 5, but that might not be the same for another 5-year-old, right? They're all different. So again, I don't like saying certain ages because I really just don't think that's beneficial. Yeah. I think that you just start, as a parent, you start when they're little, as soon as you can.
Yeah. My son is 8 and high functioning. We're wondering if we should tell him and his other siblings that he has ADHD, or if feel we can manage things all right if we just carry on. I worry about how he feels about a label.
And I appreciate that the parent said, I worry about how he feels about a label. And I have to say that tells me that you are worried about the label. Okay. So if you're worried about the label, that's going to make them worried about the label, right? So your kid probably might not know much about any of the things. So what happens is we get anxious. This goes back to us regulating our staff as parents. And this is why I do a lot of parenting support, because we work with parents first, going, we got to deal with our stuff before we deal with our kids' stuff. And so if you're anxious about it and you avoid it, they might be like, well, why didn't you tell me? Why are you telling me when I'm 13, 14? Like, that's why my brain's doing it. So I'm not bad, or I'm not stupid, or I'm not rude. I just, you know, it can be an excuse for some of these things that they're like, oh, thank God, I'm not just a bad person. No, dude, you're not bad at all. We all make mistakes, right? So that to me says you want to get more comfortable with the label. So before you present it to your child, because again, it goes back to what I said earlier. The parent was asking, guys, let's get casual. It's not a big deal, right? Casual and cool, calm. Like, hey, did you know? Have you ever heard of ADHD? Yeah. You know, Jeremy in my class has it. Like, oh yeah, Jeremy. Okay, cool. So what do you know about ADHD? Well, I know this. Well, did you know that you also have ADHD? Really? Yeah. Oh, that's why I do that thing? Yeah. Right? It could be a super casual, cool, calm, right? So we don't have to get so serious about everything. Just casual.
Yeah.
That's my suggestion.
Yeah.
And I absolutely think he should know. I think all children, I think every human needs to know, because I know someone who, as an adult, I was like, dude, you're struggling in life because I think you have ADHD and I think you need medication. And the parent ended up going, yeah, they tried to get me to medicate them in high school and I didn't. I'm like, okay, so this 35-year-old person didn't know they have ADHD, but their mom has known since they were 15. What? And this person has struggled their whole life not knowing, like that. What? Like, that blows my mind. It's sad. It's really just sad, because it held that person back from having the support they needed to be successful.
Yeah. So I'm mindful of the time. I see it's 7:57. So of course we're never going to get to all the questions.
That's right. Yeah.
I have a lot of comments just about the education system and how counselors don't even want to deal with anything besides course schedules and all that. So there's a lot to do with the education system.
Next workshop, I guess, hey?
I guess
Focusing
so.
on neurodiversity in schools and what parents can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll read this one. Our daughter decompresses and typically melts down most nights. I'm generally at my worst by this time because I'm exhausted. We've tried carving out time every day, earlier time when I can be present, but our daughter isn't ready then. We've tried put it in a jar. Let's pull it out at a more accessible time. No luck. Any suggestions on the cause of the symptom and a better way to go about that facilitates both of our needs?
So this is when you're going to use your collaborative problem solving approach, right? Because we can sit here, and I say that to parents all the time, we can sit here and come up with all these great plans and ideas and thoughts of why something's happening and what we should do, but it doesn't matter if your kid's not a part of it, because we're just making up stories. So these are conversations to have with your child when they're regulated in the daytime, when everybody's had a good sleep, and say, hey, so last couple nights been pretty rough. Yeah. What's going on?
Yeah.
What's up with that? I don't know. Now, anxiety's favorite response is, I don't know. Okay. So when you hear, I don't know, we don't let them get away with that. Because what happens is when we let them get away with it, they just keep using it. Okay. And when I say let them get away with it, I just mean we need to come in with our own ideas and go, well, do you think maybe this could be it? Or what do you think about this? Start providing some things that they can say yes or no to. So it's really that CPS model of, hey, it's been really hard for me the last couple nights. How's it been for you? Not good. Yeah, we're having a hard time. This is a rough go. What's going on? And see what happens.
Yeah. 7:59.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, there's a lot of thanks happening in the chat. I want to thank you so much. This has been so informative. Same sentiment there. I put Mary's website in the chat as well, but we will be getting that to you as well. I saw on your homepage of your website, you have a subscription to your newsletter, so people can hop there and if they want to stay connected with your information. And we really, really appreciate you bringing this forward to people. So I hope everybody has gotten something out of this, and have a great night.
Awesome. Thank you.